Well, that was longer than the last one. It nearly lasted 2 hours of the 4 that it was scheduled for. Hello everybody, this is the recap for the hearing on October 5th, 2018 for Alexander Kolpakov, aka Russian Deadpool of the Skeptic Feminist channel, for the murder of Heather Annable. And this was day 2 of officer testimony prior to the actual trial. This is just depositions for motions, because there are a couple motions to suppress that are going to be decided. So at 1 p.m. I went into the room and I sat on the defense side, and I was in the first row, but then a bailiff came in and made me move to any row but the first. Probably because it makes his job easier in keeping people from passing things to the defendant. I was just trying to get a good spot to be able to see and hear. In the room, there were the bailiff, 2 defense attorneys, the clerk, 2 prosecution attorneys. Behind the defense attorneys, there was an expert that was sitting there listening to the proceedings, and then behind him was me. The expert got to sit in the front row. On the other side, there was, on the prosecution side, in the seats, there was an officer, Heather's mom, Heather's dad, and then in the back there were 2 girls, very young girls. I'd say early 20s or younger, both of them. At 5 minutes after 1, the judge and Alexander entered the room. Alexander's hair had grown out a bit since the last time I saw him. I'd say a third of the way to full Wolverine, because it was still kind of spiked, but you know how it kind of hangs on the side when spikes grow out. It was more feathered than before. 1 minute later, he made eye contact with me and gave me like a little nod. I didn't make much of it, but it was the only eye contact with me that he's made since these proceedings have been going on, and he did not, again, in this proceeding, look over to the seats behind the prosecution where Heather's family would be. And this was for the entire hearing, which lasted about 2 hours. At 7 minutes after, Deputy Simon was sworn in and gave her career experience, and she was asked about the happenings of May 13th, 2017 at 9:15 p.m. She was conducting routine patrol, and she got dispatched. Neighbors heard gunshots and a female screaming. On arrival, she saw Officers Bailey and Lieutenant Holdren. She saw that the door of the apartment was open, lights were on, and music was playing. She was told to stay with Alexander Kolpakov, who was already on his knees and had gotten down. And she had a rifle and a holstered handgun on her. By the way, just to clarify from previous videos, it was an AR-15, not an AK-47. She said she was standing 3 to 4 feet away from him, keeping peripheral view open, because she didn't know if he was the shooter. She was asked if Kolpakov. She asked Kolpakov if he had any injuries, and he gave no clear response, just yelling. He did not know, or she did not know for sure if he was the shooter at that point. The other officers saw a female at the doorstep and called back for her to cuff Kolpakov. She kept asking him if he was injured. She kept asking if there was another threat, and he would give no clear response. She said Kolpakov managed to get up and was aggressive towards deputies, so she signaled to O'Neill to take him down. She was asked if he was put in restraints before the vehicle, and she said, "Not that I was aware of." If you hear me snap, it means in my next video I'll give my opinion on that. She did a secondary sweep with other deputies, Deputy Cart, and that was to ensure that there was no baby inside. Then defense got to ask Deputy Simon some questions, and defense asked, Officer Bailey and Lieutenant Holdren were there first, and she said yes. Were guns drawn at Kolpakov? She said yes. Was he on the ground at that point? Yes. Not in cuffs yet? Yes. They asked if Lieutenant Holdren asked Kolpakov if he was injured. She said yes. And you had an AR-15? She said yes. Slung. They asked, when you were asked to watch Kolpakov, did you point your AR-15 at him? She said no, not directly. They asked, was Kolpakov yelling while on the ground? She said yes. In pain? She couldn't tell. Yelling loudly? Yes. Aggressive tone? Not really. He yelled that mushrooms were poisoned? She said yes. He stood up on his own while cuffed? Yes. Aggressive? Yes. What commands did you give him? To be seated. Best course of action was to get him in the patrol car? Yes. Who helped? Can't recall. O'Neill escorted him, and I stepped back as several officers helped. Did you hear I had to put my sweet Heather down? No. And Deputy Simon was excused at 1:21 p.m. Then Lieutenant Holdren was called to the stand and sworn in. Lieutenant David Holdren. He is the Lieutenant of Patrol in Mesa County. His general duties were talked about. He was asked how he was dispatched to the scene. He said he noticed it on his computer first, then heard the dispatch. He parked at 33rd and Lombardy. Holdren, Bailey, and Simon arrived at the same time, he said. Bailey yelled at someone who said, "I'm the one that called. I'm the one that called." Holdren saw the open door at the unit, saw a male subject who quickly went over to a bush. He yelled verbal commands, hands up. It took multiple requests for him to come out with his hands up. Kolpakov came out and said some stuff. There was blood on his shirt, and Kolpakov got down on his knees on his own. Holdren asked for cuffs right away, approached the door, saw a female lying on her back, a gun near her, and blood all over the threshold. Holdren and Bailey cleared the residence. So the prosecution asked, where was Kolpakov when you first saw him? And he said, standing right over her. Then he went behind a bush. His failure to comply with us made us take him into cuffs. Then he was asked to identify Alexander in the room, and he did. He was asked if Alexander made any statements, and he said yes. Holdren asked Kolpakov, who did this to you? And Alex said, my name is Alexander. And he was growling. He asked Alexander, who did this? And he said, I had to put my sweet Heather down. And that he took to mean that Alexander was the shooter. He was also rambling about rats and that he was poisoned. Kolpakov was seen by an ambulance and taken to the hospital. And prosecution said, was he put in the back of a patrol car? And Holdren said, no, he resisted getting into the patrol car, so he had to be transported to the hospital. On cross-examination by the defense, they asked if he was hiding behind the bush, and he said yes. You asked him hands up? Yes. He took a few steps and got on his knees? Yes. He was compliant to this point? Yes. There was blood on his shirt? Yes. You thought he was shot? Possibly? Yes. Prior to hiding behind the bush, he was near the victim? Yes. After he was handcuffed, you approached Unit 4? Yes. You called dispatch for 2 ambulances? Yes. You swept the apartment? Yes. Deputy Simon waited with Kolpakov? Yes. And Kolpakov was in cuffs? Yes. Lieutenant Holdren said that the sounds that they heard from the apartment that made them think that maybe there was another person were because there was a stereo left on upstairs. Defense asked if Holdren asked Kolpakov who did this, and Holdren said yes. He said, my name is Alexander, in response to that question. Then he was yelling about rats and poison, and he said, I had to put my sweet Heather down. Defense asked, Kolpakov was never put into a patrol car? No, he resisted, and we restrained him. The judge asked to clarify the order of the questions that Lieutenant Holdren asked Alexander, and it was the same order that I just said to you. At 1:41 p.m., Lieutenant Holdren was excused. At 1:42, investigator Danny Norris was called to the stand, and he gave his resume, he's been working as an investigator since 2004. Prior to that, he was in the Secret Service for 2 years. On May 13th, 2017, at 10 p.m., he was called to duty to respond to the hospital to talk to Alexander Kolpakov. He went to the emergency department and talked to Deputy Orr and one other who were there. The deputies briefed Investigator Norris before he spoke to Alexander Kolpakov, and prosecution asked, did he know at that time that there was a dead female? And he said yes. The investigator was asked to identify Kolpakov in the room, and he did. When Norris got to the emergency department that night, Kolpakov was passed out, and Norris waited until he was stirring. Kolpakov was in a gown, strapped to a gurney. He did not appear to be injured. Blood was on him, and it was not his own, because he did not appear to have any injuries consistent with the blood on him. Kolpakov woke up, and Investigator Norris interviewed him. He gave him advisement of Miranda rights twice. The first time, Kolpakov said he didn't understand, and then the second time he said that he did. Kolpakov said he needed more rest before he could talk to them, but he did want to talk to them. And then prosecution asked, was evidence collected? And he said yes. Pictures of Alexander Kolpakov in the emergency department were taken. Blood on his hands, face, and feet were swabbed, and a GSR test was done. Prosecution asked if they repositioned Kolpakov to photograph him, and they said no. And the swabbed hands, face, and feet were done with a swab and distilled water. Kolpakov had minor abrasions on his feet. The GSR kit that they used has a very big magnet, and they touch repeatedly on the hands and face, and the motion he was making was like this. That's not something I could write down, but that's the motion he was making, was like this. So apparently it's a non-invasive test. Prosecution asked if the evidence was preserved beforehand, and he said yes, the hands were bagged. Prosecution asked, did you have any other roles? And he said, I assisted in a search of a car at the scene. I did a walkthrough of the apartment and didn't find anything with my walkthrough after the other walkthroughs. The car that he searched was a gray car, and he can't remember if any evidence was taken from the car. On cross-examination from the defense, he said that he was called by 10 p.m. by Sergeant Byrne. He did not know that Kolpakov was a suspect till officers at the emergency department told him what was going on. Defense asked if hands being bagged was a common procedure, and he said yes. And then at first, the defense asked, at first he said he didn't understand Miranda, and he said yes. The second time he said that he understood, yes. And then you collected evidence, yes. Defense asked, was Kolpakov groggy? And he said yes. And he asked where he was, Yes. 4 different times. Yes. Kolpakov never told you to stop? No. Never. You never received consent from Kolpakov, did you? No. Evidence was sent to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations? Yes. Sent by Investigator Burke? Yes. Did you have a warrant for Kolpakov's blood? Not at the time. At 1:57 p.m., Investigator Norse was excused, and the judge called for a 5-minute break, which one of the bailiffs, as a female bailiff, was like very happy about that because she really had to go. The defense asked Alexander if he wanted some water, and he said no. But that was all that happened in that break with the defense, really. They kind of whisper underneath their voices very expertly. I'm like 10 feet away and I can't hear a thing. At 2:05, Investigator Pete Berg was sworn in, B-U-R-G. I wrote Burke like B-U-R-K-E in my notes before, but it was Berg, because when he got on the stand, he was asked to spell his last name. He was sworn in. He's been an investigator since 2004, and he had no previous experience. He was on duty the night of May 13th. No, he was not on duty. Sergeant Byrne called him in. Eventually, and that's what makes these names weird. It's Berg and Bird, and anyways, Investigator Pete Berg said, "Eventually, I was made the lead investigator of this case." Prosecution asked, "You interviewed Kolpakov?" And he said, "Yes, at the sheriff's department." "What did you observe?" "He was calm, rational, tired, and sober." "Did you explain what you were doing to him?" "Yes." "Did you give him an explanation of his Miranda rights?" "Yes." And he said that there was a form for it as well, where he was told to initial each one of his Miranda rights and then sign it at the bottom. And then he signed at the bottom saying that he wanted to speak to investigators. And he also said he wanted to talk, but he needed some sleep. He also asked if a lawyer would be there when he was talking to investigators. And this was at 4:30 a.m. Kolpakov asked if it was second-degree murder, and why it was second-degree murder that he was being charged with. And the investigator said, well, the degree could change throughout the case, but he explained to him what second-degree murder meant. Prosecution asked, what was his reaction to learning that Heather was deceased? Quiet. He told Alexander that he could sleep until noon that day and then he'd be back. And that's when he exited the room and then came back. And when he came back, that was when Kolpakov asked for an explanation of what second-degree murder meant. On defense's cross-examination of Investigator Berg, the defense asked, he was arrested at this point. Yes. Were you already the lead investigator? Yes. You knew what had happened at the scene? Yes. He was given a sedative? Not sure. He appeared groggy? He said he was extremely drowsy. He said he didn't remember much of what happened. He said he rested, he needed rest to sleep so that he could remember more. Did he ask for a lawyer? Yes. Was Heather his girlfriend? Yes. You told him at that point that she had died? Yes. And then you left the room? Yes. And then you returned? Yes. And that's when Alexander asked me what second-degree murder meant. The next questions were about evidence for motions for sanctions based on destruction of evidence. And that was just like an announcement that the defense made. The defense asked Berg, the apartment was searched? Yes. 3 bags of mushrooms were in the kitchen? Yes. 1 bag of remnants? Yes. All 4 bags were sent to CBI by you? Yes. And then defense entered Exhibit MHD. And as far as the nomenclature of the numbers, what I noticed was this is a motions hearing, and all the evidence that they're presenting starts with MH, and I think it stands for motions hearing. And Exhibit MHD was a CBI lab report of mushrooms. Defense asked, the 3 bags were all 1 item? Yes. 3 items by CBI? Yes. So each bag was individually tested by them? Yes. All identified psilocybin. And the investigator tried very horribly to pronounce psilocybin, and he could not. Like, it was strange that he could not pronounce the word. But, moving on. The bag of remnants was tested. Yes. Controlled substances not detected. It weighed 0.857 grams. Next, the defense entered Defense Exhibit MHC, a toxicology report of Heather Annabelle's blood. Have you seen this before? Defense asked Investigator Berg. No. It looks like a letter from the coroner to the department. Defense asked that the letter be allowed as evidence, and the prosecution objected. But the judge decided to allow it. Kolpakov's blood was taken, defense asked the investigator. Yes. 2 separate draws? Yes. Then the defense presented Defense Exhibit MHB, which is a CBI report on Alexander Kolpakov's blood. Defense asked Investigator Berg, you've seen this before? Yes. Prosecution immediately objected. The judge allowed it. And then no psilocybin was detected in vial 1. Yes. 2 separate draws were done. Yes. The first vial was drawn on May 13th, 11:02 p.m. Yes. And this is, he's looking at the sheet, basically confirming what's on the report for the defense. The first draw was 3 vials of blood. Yes. And these were CBI item 2. Yes. CBI tested 1 vial. Law enforcement tested the other. Yes. CBI outsourced these tests. Yes. CBI item 1 was a different blood draw of 3 vials at 2:42 a.m. on May 14th. Yes. Roughly 5 hours after the police were on scene. Yes. Did you participate in a vehicle search? Yes. With a warrant? Yes. Did you see an affidavit supporting this warrant? Yes. And then defense entered in motions hearing Exhibit A, a search warrant for the apartment, and it was accepted. And then no further questions were needed from that guy. Sorry, there's a train pulling through. Prosecution asks, there were 3 vials of blood on 2 separate occasions? Yes. They were sent to law enforcement and CBI? Yes. CBI sent samples to outside labs? Yes. As you walked into the room the second time with Kolpakov, he asked for the definition of second degree without a prompt? Yes. Kolpakov told you he didn't remember much in response to the questions? Yes, he said he needed some sleep to remember. Investigator Berg was excused at 2:35 p.m. Defense calls one more witness. This man was obviously of Mexican descent. He had a chin beard, no mustache. He had long hair, about, I'd say, 4-inch length hair. And he was wearing a red, black, and white flannel and blue jeans. His name was Mr. Anthony Martinez, and prosecution immediately objects. And the judge allows the testimony from Mr. Martinez, and it is in regards to hearsay as far as the words of Heather Annable herself. Mr. Martinez lived at 3296 Lombardi Lane that night, and he lived in apartment 4. He was asked, who lived in apartment 3? And Mr. Martinez said, Alexander, Heather, and then another person, and he said, I think her name is Gwen. That's how he pronounced it. And he was asked, were you close friends with them? He said, no. Do you remember what happened on the night of May 13th? And he said, yes. I got home at 5:30, and I got some water, and then I went to go check my mail. My buddy, Jimmy, had an oil filter for me, so I went over to talk with him, and Jimmy lives like 30 yards away, right? So because he wasn't going that far away, he said he left his door open. That's when he heard a scream after he was talking with his friend Jimmy about this oil filter, and it was a male voice. When he got back Alexander Kolpakov was sitting at the top of his stairwell inside of his apartment, and then he was asked to identify Alexander in the room, and he did. And then Mr. Martinez was asked, was it normal for him to be there? No. Had he ever been there before? No. What was he doing? He was yelling into the phone on FaceTime, "She's trying to kill me." And then Heather came over. Defense asked, did Kolpakov have any clothes on? He said, no. Did you help him get some clothes on? Yes. Heather came, and in order to calm him down, she brought a pet rat. Kolpakov kept yelling, and Mr. Martinez kept telling Kolpakov, in order to calm him down, "You're a good dude, man. You're a good dude, man." Heather explained that he was on shrooms. Heather said they took about an eighth apiece, almost 4 grams each. Heather said they both induced too many shrooms, and he really stressed the word induced. Defense asked, how was Heather acting? A lot more calm than Alexander. Was Mr. Kolpakov out of control? Yes. Heather was more in control? Yes. Heather was making sense? Yes. Heather was trying to calm down Alexander? Yes. She brought the pet rat over, and she was rubbing his chest. Did Heather tell you anything else? No. How long was this event? 3 to 5 minutes. Then she calmed him down and they left. Did it appear that they were on drugs? He was loud. Yeah, for the most part. I'm not one to judge, but it was coming from somewhere. The witness was then excused. Defense said that they had up to 3 more witnesses for the motions hearing this part of this trial, and they wanted to talk about available dates. And what got set was October 17th at 9 a.m. They said that they're going to need an additional 2 hours at the most part, and the 3 people that they intend to call at that time are a CBI non-expert. So it's an employee at CBI that is not an expert on anything. Jamie Linwood, who did the tests on the vegetable matter, I suppose, couldn't really understand like which test she performed. And then a lady named Sarah, whose last name I didn't catch, who was an expert in testing. At 2:50, Alexander Kolpakov left the room. At 2:51, the defense and prosecution lawyers huddled for a second, and then the prosecution left. And then at 2:54, the defense left. Like three minutes later, just left the judge, the clerk, and me in the room, and it was kind of an awkward exit. There was no like, this session is over moment. No court adjourned. Everyone just kind of left. As far as that October 17th extra hearing, I'm not going to be able to go to that because that's not enough advance notice for me to take off from my other responsibilities. But I will be trying to make it to the October 14th one 3 days earlier. The new October 17th hearing for those three witnesses about testing things, that is already on the online court docket. So that's it for the facts, and some of my opinions will come out in the next video.